I just want it. Bernie, I need it.
No, we're canceling it.
No.
This went to hibernation for like 2 weeks.
I can't. I don't have the hibernation glands. Bernie, I need to cry tears.
I need it.
Did you get the regular edition?
Yeah, I'm just getting the regular.
Man, the collector's edition was giga money. I didn't buy it, but it was giga money.
I believe that. I mean, the normal edition's $70.
Giga money, yeah.
Nintendo's getting in on that action. But dang, I mean, I feel like the game's gonna be twice as big as the first, which was already huge. So
Yeah, should be fun.
$70 probably makes more sense than that Redfall game that everybody's trashing.
You know, I only heard about that game after people were trashing it. Like,
Yeah,
that was like
me
the
too.
first piece of news.
I've never
yeah.
heard about it
I
before
didn't even
that.
know it was a game. Yeah.
I just like the pictures of. Have you seen the pictures where everything's like at a different like scaling ratio, where like there's like a person, but like the TV is too big, but the table's too small. Like it's just like they threw a bunch of assets together and didn't
No, I
make
didn't even
them
see
coherent
that.
at all.
But that
Oh,
sounds
okay.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Sounds hilarious.
Pretty funny. Pretty funny.
All I did was I watched Moon play that new Star Wars game.
Oh yeah, I forgot that came out too.
Yeah.
Why didn't they release that on May 4th?
That's a good question.
Why release it
Missed
so close?
opportunity,
Yeah.
Missed opportunity.
Cringe.
Spoilers, all Jedis are evil. I don't know Jedi lore.
All Jedis are evil. What?
Yeah,
Doesn't make any sense.
I know.
Isn't the main character a Jedi?
Yeah, he's evil.
No, he's
evil as
not.
fuck.
No, you know he's good.
Well, how do you know that?
Cause he's like.
Al is a good boy.
Haven't you seen a picture of him? He looks like the most vanilla bean.
Yeah, he kind of does.
He crosses the street at the crossing. He's never gonna jaywalk.
I
We
was
call
watching.
that milk toast edition.
Vanilla bean references Q, so it's even better.
I don't know Star Wars lore, so when I was watching it, I was just like, I don't know any of these characters, but I'm still watching. All I found out was that he's a Jedi that betrayed or is a traitor for whatever reason, but they didn't say why.
I thought he just survived. I thought that was the
Yeah,
premise.
he was last survivor.
Oh shit! When Anakin killed him?
Yo,
Killed
actually,
everyone?
speaking of
I know that
Survivor, I have a video for you. I don't know if you watch this guy. But this video was great.
I'm Bear Grylls,
I'm gonna link it in the game
and I'm gonna show you.
This highlights the true power of AI.
Okay, I'm watching. Man versus Wild. Elden Ring.
He locks himself in Volcano Manor without any greases, so he has to figure out how to, get out. Like, he basically soft locks himself and then soft locks himself. But he does it all in the style of an actual episode of Man vs. Wild, and it's pretty accurate to the show.
I remember watching it. Wait, so he walked all the way here without activating like a bonfire?
Yeah, he explains how he gets there
Oh.
too. So that's the first part of the video, is getting himself stranded.
Oh yeah, I guess you can't walk out because you have to like fall in, right?
Yeah. But but he apparently used AI to give it, like, or ChatGPT to give it the style of, like, the Man vs. Wild screenplay with his, like, just general gameplay outline, and then obviously he used the, like, the voice software to use Bear, like, it sounds just like Bear Grylls, because I'm assuming it's using samples from the show to generate it.
I see.
But it's like, you know, I'm pretty impressed by how he's integrated the AI here.
They're taking our job.
Yeah.
It's free content.
Well, I mean, I think this is like an ideal use case if he's using it to supplement, you know, an idea he already had.
You mean you can use AI as a tool?
Yeah.
What?
What?
Is that a real glitch?
Yeah, everything he does is real glitches.
Oh shit! What the fuck?
Was it the like
He just fucking teleported
shield
across the map.
thing? Yeah. No, that's a real glitch. But yeah, that guy does a bunch of, like, all his other videos. They're not all narrated by Bear Grylls, but his other videos are other, like, challenge runs. Like, he does a run where he's not allowed to talk to anybody, or he's not allowed to use the control stick. They're pretty impressive. Because, like, you would think that something like not talking to somebody, I think that was Dark Souls 2, you'd think that, like, oh, that's not really a big restriction, but in Dark Souls 2 it actually breaks a lot of things.
Oh, you know what? I remember finding that monster that teleports you there.
Yeah.
I never knew that that's what it did.
Yep.
I never figured it out. Well, now I know.
I'm sure somebody's made a lore video on why that one abductor down there takes you to Volcano Manor. I could not tell you why.
I love lore. This is where the episode finally starts.
Can't believe you've never heard of Bear Grylls. He's like the survivalist meme. He's where like the guy the
In order to
narrator.
survive this, I'm gonna have to drink my own piss.
Yeah.
I know the meme.
Oh,
I
okay.
never watched them, but I never watched Bear Grylls episode before.
Oh, okay. I thought you didn't
know.
know. I thought you didn't know who he was.
No. I know.
Oh, okay.
Wait, he uses Hearthstone music.
He uses all sorts of music.
It's hilarious.
There's like there's a few other tracks that's like I recognize that track. Can't remember what they were. Good God. Whew. Didn't expect to get this much of a thing. You just threw 3,000 of a thing at me. Calm down there, Hitler.
Is he gonna kill the Bloodskin Noble with literally 0 damage? Ain't no way.
Nah, he's not. His whole thing is he's not particularly skilled, but he has an ingenuity about him. Like he usually doesn't do like really technical challenges, just kind of weird stuff.
No way. Is he gonna make this jump? That'd be crazy. He made it.
Ain't no way.
Persona 5 victory music.
Purse owner. Port Piscarilius.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna have to finish this video later. I'm gonna hop off for the night, guys.
Alright, see ya.
Good night.
Good night.
See ya.
Bye, folks.
Yep.
Bye.
Bark, bark.
Yeah, but what if you were Port Piscarilius? Peace.
I need this flask so I can drink my own piss.
Huh? That's why they call it Port Piscarilius. So I went in here thinking I was gonna do something. Now I don't know what it was. Literally passed through the. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess we go to our doing. Go to Brimhaven. Oh wait, I just realized there could be a flaw in my strategy here. Unless there's like pot. Are there pot packs? Wait a minute. Let me think about this. Toothies, pickaxes, and lava converge. Ooh. Who is this man? Oh, son of a whore. This is the guy right next to that. Okay, can I teleport to the blast mine? Can't teleport to the blast mine. I'm in a bit of a pickle here. I'm gonna have to freaking walk. I didn't sign up to walk. Yet walking is what I shall have to do. like 500 pots, dude. It's gonna be epic.
Yep.
Alright, time to MLG Pro buy pots. Buy 50 pots, deposit pot. Where we're going. We don't need pots, except we do buy these pots. It's very important to me. How many pots I got? Need 400 pots. You have to buy them. Inventory at a time. Inventory is pot. Ain't no one ever expected to buy so many pots. We're up to 200 pots, my god. Pots. The pot singularity is accelerating. Need 100 more pots. Going into battle. For 70 pots. 2 more pot loads of pot, and I will be pot pleat. There she pots. Alright, how do I make these dynamites? Dynamite! Okay, so I guess let's deposit this and this. Move the pots over here for now. Put all of these things together. Boop. 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 grab like 8 of each, I guess. Okay, we can grab all of this. Okay, we can actually grab 9. Can't wait to do this 100 times. Did you end up going back to Batwa Talon, or you quit forever?
I haven't gone back yet. I'll go think about going back when I feel like it. I do need to at least beat Ganon, so.
Can't beat a lightning guy. I need to just back to beat Hot Ganondorf. He's gonna beat you with the power of thirst.
But I'll have the Master Sword and my actual armor instead of this crappy
That's what you
desert
think.
set.
You won't even have an arm. Your arm will be gone.
But my arm won't be gone for another week and a half. Another week now, honestly.
Not even. Well, actually, yeah, not
A week and a little more.
No, a week or a week minus 1 minute now.
If it will let me download at my midnight, at that midnight rather than my own midnight.
I think preload comes up tomorrow. If you ordered digitally, which you did.
Well, that doesn't mean it'll let me activate it until then, right?
No, but you'll have it downloaded, ready to go.
This is true.
Yeah, my pre-order was stupid in retrospect. I forgot about preloading. I didn't think Nintendo did that really.
I mean, I had no idea it was a thing, so it's not like I did it for that advantage. That's for sure.
I mean, with a Zelda game, I would like owning a physical copy, even though you can't emulate it, so it's really actually not a big deal. But mostly, I didn't want to have to buy an SD card, but I probably should have anyway. What can I even do with this dynamite? Dynamite!
You can bark the moon.
Oh! You can blast mine with it. So anyway, I started blast mining. That's when I said blast mine. I hardly knew mine.
I'll show you a mine. Look at this mine.
Are you sipping?
Mining.
Minecraft, mining. Sarkanza made his 1 minute daily appearance chat. Nope. The cryptid has not shown himself yet. Let's open a YouTube video. That'll summon him. Unless somebody's streaming. Not really. Not really.
This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream and Nebula, where you can watch this video ad-free, but more about that later. The pub, the cafe, the town square, all of these things have something in common. They're not home, they're not work, they're something else. They're enjoyable public places where you can meet friends, socialize, or maybe just people watch, as long as you're not being weird about it. But these places are becoming more and more scarce. And in car-dependent suburbia, they've been erased almost completely, and that's a problem. In the 1980s, sociologist Ray Oldenburg described a concept that has existed in cities for centuries, the third place. He defined this as a place nearby that isn't the place you live, the first place, nor the place you work, the second place. The third place is a free or relatively low-cost spot to hang out and talk. Some examples of third places are French cafes, Japanese bathhouses, libraries, churches, and community centers. When we lived in Riverdale in Toronto, Rooster Coffee was a very popular third place for people who lived nearby. The classic third place in the UK is the local pub, which most people just call their local. I've had a local in most places I've lived. Now, I'm not going to talk about my current local because I don't need you internet weirdos showing up there every night, but this was our local when we lived in central London. That's real London, not fake London. This place was a pretty typical British local, a pub in the middle of a residential area within easy walking distance of dozens of houses. After going there for a while, we started to recognize some of the regulars, and there were even toys and a box of Lego for the kids. And since our flat was ridiculously small because it's all we could afford in central London, it was nice to have a different place to relax and chat with the neighbors. So we were gutted when the pub closed down and was turned into housing, which kind of sucked for us, but it could have been worse. It could have turned into a Weatherspoons. Yuck. When you live in a city, you may opt for a smaller house or apartment in order to live where you want. After all, they say the three most important things in real estate are location, location, and I forget the third one, but it's really important too. Anyway, choosing a place to live that has everything you need nearby, accessible without driving, is one of the biggest benefits of living in a walkable city. And one of the reasons that a smaller apartment is a viable option in a place like this is because there are plenty of opportunities for leisure outside of the home. This is where the third place comes in. It's a place where you can just be somewhere else to relax or chat with a friend, but it's so much better than sitting in your suburban holding pen, backyard, because you can spontaneously meet up with other people or get to know your neighbors. If you're my age, or you just have good taste, you might remember a show called Cheers. While the hairstyles haven't held up, the show itself has, and it's actually a really good depiction of a third place. It's a cheap bar with regulars from all walks of life, where people who might not ordinarily talk to one another can form relationships. It's a place where an erudite, blowhard psychologist like Fraser will hang out with a small-town country boy like Woody. These guys have nothing in common.
Checkmate. That's my king.
Except their third place. Third places aren't valuable just because it's fun to hang out and chat, which of course it is, but third places fulfill other vital social functions too. They create social cohesion by bringing groups of people together that wouldn't ordinarily mix. For example, a mechanic could meet a financial advisor and exchange each other's services. Sociologists often talk about relationships that they call weak ties, or what normies call the people you kinda know. One thing these researchers consistently find is that many people get jobs through their weak ties. It makes sense when you think about it. I've heard about lots of job opportunities through acquaintances. But when I'm just hanging out at home with my kids, nobody pops in to discuss my career objectives. Third places also build neighborhood unity and trust. According to the American Community Life Survey, 81% of Americans who hang out with people they recognize in a third place say they trust their neighbors, while only 66% of people with no third place trust theirs. So a third place can make neighbors less suspicious of one another, kind of like the polar opposite of the next door app. Third places are also the first spots that new residents in a city might make friends or social connections. And they're essential points of connection for aging adults who lack social opportunities after retirement. Another unexpected benefit of third places is their utility in an emergency. As community hubs, they're often the first places that can help after a disaster. Baltimore and Minneapolis are two North American cities creating resilience hubs in trusted third places like civic centers and churches. After a flood or fire, community members can access informal assistance at a familiar location faster than they'd be able to wait for national aid. In much of North America, however, easily accessible third places have almost completely disappeared. One reason is that zoning makes it nearly impossible to build anything other than single-family housing in huge swaths of the United States and Canada. It's hard to visit your neighborhood pub when your neighborhood isn't allowed to build a pub. Finding a third place is even harder if you live in a city with strict loitering laws. Loitering is defined differently in different places, but the most broad definition is lingering in a public place for an extended amount of time with no apparent reason. In other words, hanging out. Exactly the kind of thing you'd want to do outside of home, work, or school. When I was a teenager, we'd get kicked out of public parks, so we literally just walked around suburban neighborhoods and competed to see how many keep off pesticide use signs we could steal. Yeah, I'm serious. That's literally what I did for several years of my life. My third place was suburban grass lawns recently sprayed with pesticides. Lacking public space, many suburbanites try to recreate a third place, but in their own private fiefdom. You might have a neighborhood barbecue in your backyard, join a private social club, or God forbid, build yourself a man cave. And the kids will play on their own in your own backyard instead of playing with other kids in your local park. But all of these lack the important characteristics of a true third place. You're unlikely to run into anyone you don't know, and you're almost certainly not going to meet anyone who isn't demographically similar to you. Most suburban neighborhoods in North America are built with all houses at about the same price point. This means that all of the people you'd meet in your homemade hang zone are probably the same socioeconomic status that you are. And one of the benefits of a third place is meeting people who aren't exactly like you. And private recreations of public places remove all spontaneity anyway. There's nothing wrong with planning to have friends over, but if it's your only option for socializing, then you miss out on the chance encounters and bumping into familiar faces like you get from your local. Maybe you can drive to your favorite bar, but if you have to drive there, you're probably not meeting people who live near you. And a place where you go out with friends and never talk to anyone else is very different from the neighborhood pub where you run into the same people on a regular basis. Plus, if you have to drive there, you can't hang out all night getting absolutely sloshed, or at least you shouldn't. North America has a lot of problems with drunk driving due to its insane zoning laws, but that's a topic for a future video. Of course, the most famous suburban attempt at recreating a third place in suburbia is the shopping mall. Whether you're a teenager who can't go anywhere without a driver's license or a senior who wants to go for a walk but your suburb has no safe sidewalks, the mall is the suburban alternative to the town square. But we can't rely on malls as third places either. For one thing, a lot of malls are shutting down. Up to a quarter of them will be gone soon, according to some estimates. And their replacement, the big box store, is even worse. But more importantly, malls don't do what a third place does. They are designed to be attractions that draw people from all over, not just from your local community, and therefore they don't build any kind of social cohesion. You're unlikely to recognize familiar faces at the mall unless you work there, and you're really unlikely to strike up a conversation with any of them unless you're one of those pushy kiosk guys. Some cities are trying to recreate third places themselves. In Washington, D.C., office workers can reserve tables and chairs in certain public parks to work and socialize, but again, this eliminates the spontaneity that is inherent to a third place. You can't just hop by and see the regulars. It's a whole thing that you have to plan. Also, reserving a public table to do even more work on your laptop is kind of defeating the purpose of a place outside of work. However, one interesting third place that's still hanging on in many places in the US is the local barbershop. This is common in many Middle Eastern cultures, but also in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods in the US as well. The barbershop can function as a third place where men can hang out and chat, even if they're not there for a haircut. Of course, there are still historical walkable neighborhoods in North America where third places are more accessible, but unfortunately their numbers have been declining since the 2008 recession, and the lockdowns during the pandemic accelerated this trend. According to the same American Community Life Survey, in 2021, just 56% of Americans report having a spot in their communities they go to regularly. That was 9 percentage points lower than in 2019. Unsurprisingly, the same survey showed that Americans who do have a local spot generally live in denser, walkable urban areas and not suburbia. Ultimately, US and Canadian cities will never have really great third places as long as zoning stays broken. As of right now, third places don't exist in most new neighborhoods in America, mostly because they can't. And trying to recreate their benefits in a world that is specifically designed to exclude them is always going to fail. The concept of a third place can seem a bit nebulous at times, and it's easy for people to dismiss it. I've heard suburbanites say, "I'd much rather hang out in my basement with my friends than go out somewhere," which may be true, but I really think that some of this sentiment comes from people who have never really had a good third place nearby before, a place you can easily stop by whenever you want, without driving and without taking a trip out of your neighborhood, because once you try it, you don't really want to live without it. Ultimately, if a neighborhood truly prioritizes third places, it's going to be a better place to live in general, even when you're not spending time in them. A neighborhood that plans for third places will necessarily be more walkable, more accessible, and a better place to live. It could even turn your neighborhood into somewhere where everybody knows your name. And speaking of names you know, have you checked out Nebula yet? It's the streaming platform for educational creators, and it's full of lots of creators you probably already know, such as Wendover Productions and Legal Eagle. Lindsay Ellis is even back making videos, but only on Nebula. With one subscription, you get access to over 150 creators and over 14,000 titles. All videos are ad-free and sponsor-free. Plus, there is content exclusive to Nebula, including Nebula Originals, where you'll find long-form educational content with high production quality, almost like mini documentaries. And if you like documentaries, the absolute best way to sign up to Nebula is with their bundle deal with CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is an online streaming service for high-quality, full-length documentaries and non-fiction films with thousands of titles covering a wide range of topics. I've been watching their Cities of Tomorrow series, which talks about how cities may evolve in the future, and it's interesting to see that even the builders of new cities are finally acknowledging that mixed use is required to build a vibrant community. If you sign up for CuriosityStream at curiositystream.com/notjustbikes or by using the code NotJustBikes, you'll get CuriosityStream for a discounted price, and you'll also get emailed an invite for a free Nebula account that you can use for as long as you're subscribed. Sign up today at curiositystream.com/notjustbikes. Thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video. I'd also like to thank my supporters on Nebula and Patreon who pay me to go for beers with the neighbors. If you'd like to get your name in this lovely list of supporters, visit patreon.com/notjustbikes.
Dynamite! Oh, beautiful. What if you were Dynamite?
Sounds dynamite.
Where's Dynamite going? So I should put this in the mining tab. Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow.
Accurate.
3 months. At 12:01 a.m. on July 6, 2018, this short line was added to Chapter 99 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States. With that, new pneumatic tires of rubber of a kind used on aircraft, parts of stock pumps imported for use with machines for making cellulosic pulp, paper, or cardboard, machines for mixing mineral substances with bitumen, spherical roller bearings, lithium primary cells and primary batteries, fuses for a voltage not exceeding 1,000 volts, and some 278 other products would now be subject to a 25% import tax when coming from China to the US. This small tweak and the $36 billion of goods it would impact was the first volley and would later be known as the US-China trade war. The next rounds came quick. Just weeks after, the Trump administration initiated a smaller second package covering some $16 billion in goods. Then in September, after a Chinese response, an absolutely massive package of 10% tariffs on some $200 billion. Finally, after further Chinese action, these rates were raised to a crippling 25%. Now, a Chinese-made space heater that might have sold for $48 would cost $60, or more likely, a US distributor would look for suppliers from other non-tariffed countries so that they could get prices back down to $48. The ultimate net effect of this was an 8.5% reduction in trade from China to the US and a 26.3% decline in the reverse. But perhaps more relevantly, this spat dethroned China from its perch atop the list of US trading partners. Now ranking higher was Canada in the second spot and Mexico.
No, I'd like my arms back personally. No, stop, get off my shoulder. Hey.
Keeping China from the top. The next emerged not out of Washington, of course.
Cat.
From Wuhan. After the headlines were dominated by the news of a mystery novel coronavirus in China, then by COVID's global spread, then by the world's descent into lockdown, then by breakneck vaccine development, then by the shot's wide-scale rollout across the developed world, summer 2021's headlines were dominated by supply chain chaos. Armed with lockdown savings, but still facing barriers to spending them on restaurants, concerts, and plane tickets, American consumers started buying lots and lots of things. Physical, real-world products. COVID, however, was still exerting influence, meaning dock workers and truck drivers in California were still getting sick, while their counterparts in China, Vietnam, or India were still largely unvaccinated or vaccinated with less effective shots, meaning stricter social distancing and lockdown restrictions were still in place, blunting shipping and manufacturing itself. The net effect was what made it to the headlines. Factories struggled to produce fast enough, ships sat offshore for weeks waiting to get unloaded, American store shelves sat empty as stock simply could not come fast enough. By late 2022, the Trans-Pacific capacity crunch had largely dissipated, supply and demand had equalized, and container rates had nearly returned to 2019 levels, but supply chains were never able to fully repair as Russia's invasion of Ukraine wreaked havoc on global trade. Sanctions cut off supply to key metals, energy and food costs rose globally, and marine and air cargo was rerouted to avoid the belligerent nation. Meanwhile, today's China is certainly not the China it used to be. While perhaps a truism, up until recently, rapid economic development was the decades-long norm, but the nation's now entered a new era. In the most concise narrative, one single factor is attributed as the ultimate source of China's unprecedented economic ascent: low-cost manufacturing. China was a place where foreign firms could effectively offshore manufacturing and save massively through low labor costs, but in many ways, the country's industrial sector became a victim of its own success. In 20 years, the nation's GDP per capita rose 10 times, and with that, quality of life improved massively. Major Chinese cities like Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen started featuring the same shops, restaurants, and hotels as Tokyo, London, or New York. The luxury goods market exploded as an unprecedented number of millionaires and billionaires were minted, and a genuine middle class developed, living a similar quality of life as those in the US, Europe, or any developed nation. But to the outside, to the companies that had previously offshored to China, this increase in purchasing power meant a dollar didn't go as far anymore within the People's Republic. Wages rose, and so too, in step, did manufacturing costs. The peak of inbound foreign direct investment to China has long passed as multinational enterprises have now focused elsewhere for their lowest cost manufacturing, but this was of little concern to the nation as they were able to parlay the wealth generated from this era into developing an impressive array of homegrown businesses. There are behemoth e-commerce platforms like JD.com and Alibaba, sprawling tech conglomerates like Tencent and Huawei, unicorn startups like DJI and Didi, even the first non-American social media platform to attain global mainstream adoption with ByteDance's TikTok. But TikTok is a rare exception. Overwhelmingly, the business China does with America is not through services, it's with physical products. Physical products need to physically travel to the American end consumer, but the problem that's now coming into focus is that America is really, really far from China. Shanghai is the world's busiest container port, while the combination of Los Angeles and Long Beach is the US's, so trips between the two are about as common as they come, but they're no small feat. From the moment the Chinese coast disappears behind, a vessel won't see Los Angeles for another 18 days, assuming everything goes right, which it often does not. Even with massive improvements since 2021 supply chain chaos, major container carriers only range between 50 and 60% schedule reliability. Offshoring, just-in-time manufacturing, and even globalization itself are all terms and phenomenons that largely developed in the past 30 years. In fact, some experts consider the fall of the Berlin Wall as the start of the era of peak globalization. But this era might, in retrospect, be considered bookended by the trade war, COVID, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The world has returned to a more fractured state, and it's worth remembering that prior to this conflict, Russia's relationship with Europe and the US was not all that different from China's today. Diplomatic relations are maintained, but they're tense. Certain respected Western leaders now speak of conflict with China, likely spurred by an invasion of Taiwan, as inevitable. So that's to say, the world is already less globalized than it was in 2017, and there are certain concerningly possible events that would make a trade war, COVID, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine look like warm-up laps. So, 2023, in the world of logistics, is marked by a consolidation of concerns. COVID and Ukraine expose the vulnerabilities, and there's widespread concern that these could only be the start. The consensus, therefore, is that there are essentially two options. One can fortify the globalized supply chain through building more slack in the system, ordering components earlier, keeping more in stock, manufacturing inventory earlier, but this comes with a very real, surprisingly significant cost. The other option is to remove the risk. Remove the physical and political gulf between the manufacturer and the market, and this option has proved surprisingly popular. All that's needed is an alternative. Another developing country on the other side of the Pacific where wages are low and the workforce is large. A country like Mexico. From a manufacturer's point of view, Mexico's not perfect. Of 180 countries ranked by the Corruption Perception Index, Mexico comes in at 128th. Of the 190 ranked by ease of doing business, Mexico ranks 60th. Of the world's 50 busiest seaports, Mexico is home to none. Its largest, the port of Manzanillo, outpaced nearly 6 times over by that of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Further complicating things, it's hard to get around Mexico. The jagged Sierra Madre ranges run from the country's northwest to its southeast, parched deserts define much of the country's north, and dense forestry covers much of its south. The roads, rails, and bridges that cross these mountain ranges and cut through desert and forest alike, well, Mexican infrastructure is getting better, but it still lags far behind China's. But complicated perceptions, outdated assumptions, and difficult internal transportation networks aside, Mexico is blessed with one simple geographic gift that no country other than Canada can lay claim to. It shares a border with the world's largest economy. While the Rio Grande River isn't actually navigable, it's home to one of North America's most valuable ports. Connecting Texas and the Mexican state of Nuevo León is the World Trade International Bridge. It's strictly commercial, 8 lanes wide, it sees over 6,000 northbound trucks cross it every single day, and since its construction in 2000, it has never been busier. As of 2022, the inland port ranks first among American points of entry in trade value, and all this increased importance in stacking traffic is by and large due to what manufacturing in northern Mexico has to offer that China simply can't. Speed and flexibility at low cost. About 150 miles or 250 kilometers down Mexico's Highway 85 and just outside the small city of Salinas, Victoria, is this, a barren dirt lot. Except it's not actually a barren dirt lot. This is Hofusan Industrial Park, a 200-acre complex constructed by a private Chinese-Mexican partnership designed to pull in Chinese manufacturers. It's so new, with construction beginning in 2017, that satellite maps have yet to capture the development. But it's there, and it's bold. The master plan is to lure over 100 Chinese manufacturers to the gated park, build out a residential area to house employees, and establish a host of services, from Chinese restaurants to hotels and hospitals. The idea is to build out a little slice of China where labor is stable and Chinese executives and operators can feel somewhat at home. With much of the land still resembling a construction site 6 years in, this sparkling master plan is far from a reality. But it is trending in the right direction. Hisense, an electronics manufacturer, has made the move. So too have furniture makers Kuka Home, Sunan, and Manwa. And neighboring them are more Chinese manufacturers. Favour, Skyish, Asenstar, Bellenturf have all bought into the project. The incentives, especially since the opening of the trade war that's made manufacturing in Mexico more cost competitive, are just too strong. Even without the restaurant, shops, and housing that's supposed to make the move more appealing and the transition smoother, Chinese companies are taking...
Alright. That took a long time to make that dynamite, but what have we got here? The Forsaken Tower quest. We gotta do that now. Wintertide teleport would be good. Well, I'll bring a games necklace. I don't know why I've turned so southern. Bring 6 coal and 1 adamantite ore. No, I will not be doing that because I can't. Ferry access. And tinderbox. I grabbed 6 tinderboxes. That is such devastation. And I don't have to fight anything. Wunderbar.
the leap, inside the gates of Hafusson Park and outside them too. The tech company Lenovo, for instance, has been manufacturing just outside of Monterrey for over a decade. And in 2022 alone, 44 separate Asian companies opened new manufacturing spaces in Mexico, with 9 of the 10 largest being Chinese-owned and 7 of them opening in the state of Nuevo León. Zooming out from the state, this is a graph of Chinese investment in Mexico. The skyward trajectory of investment is simply unmistakable. While concerns over security and capable infrastructure still loom, the deal is too good to wait on. Of course, a few dozen companies relocating across a decade plus doesn't necessarily in itself signal the rise of Mexico as the world's factory, or that China's relinquishing the role, or that this is the end of offshoring as we know it. Right now, the sample size is small. But the reasons companies are moving to Mexico aren't going away, and the appeal of manufacturing in Mexico extends beyond China. Well, China might be new to northern Mexico, Japan isn't, South Korea isn't, and the US isn't. To industrial manufacturers, the region's value has been well understood.
Alright, it's time to do a quest! Yeah! Hiya! What do you want, human? Okay, don't have to make this a race thing, dwarf. The doors of Din. Oh. Is this the quest that's telling me about Winterton? Never heard of it. We are all children of the flame. What's a winter Todd? Is my character gotten hit too many times, Don? They don't know what winter
Yes.
Todd is. They think they were just fletching for no reason and getting chilled by the cold? They didn't bother looking at the thing?
Look, it can be hard.
Oh.
One day you're winning Todd, and then the next day a monkey hits you in the head with a rock.
True. The Hammer of Din! I have an Ivan guarantee that this is a Diablo 2 reference.
All right.
The Hammer of Din. Hammer Din.
I don't get it.
Hammerden?
I don't get it.
Hamar Dechin.
I don't get it.
Alright, I think it's fast to go to Sir.
Good for decades. Years before the establishment of NAFTA, Mexico worked to maximize the appeal of its lower cost of labor and proximity to the US by setting up the maquiladora system. Essentially, low-cost, tax-advantaged factories owned by foreign companies that state officials hoped would tamp down unemployment and entice foreign investments. With the arrival of free trade agreements, these factories exploded in number. Northern Mexico first experienced the invigorating arrival of auto companies like Kia, Toyota, BMW, Ford, and Audi, among others. Then came the rest as Lego, Samsung, LG, 3M, GE, and countless other recognizable brands moved into the region. Their collective arrival transformed the Mexican economy. In a 2012 analysis of maquiladoras, some 5,055 existed across the country, mostly in the north, and the factories employed just over 2 million Mexicans. The value of these turnkey factories persists too, as they help to counter narratives of Mexican states being too dangerous and unpredictable for business to places ripe and ready to establish a new manufacturing hub for companies spanning the globe. What Mexico has had to offer in recent decades has proven too good to pass up. The factories already exist, the wages, though higher than some Eastern developing countries, are low, and by being here, not only are tariffs now out of the picture, but companies are also relocating to a Western business environment where patent and IP protection is stronger, political risk is lower, and the negative optics of offshoring are minimized. Simply put, beyond what's pushing Chinese manufacturers abroad, Mexico itself has developed tremendous pull. Automotive and electronic manufacturing.
Worthiness is hard to find. However, the one who restores my great tower to former glory will be worthy of my legendary hammer. Oh no, a 5-gallon jug and an 8-gallon jug. It's time.
manufacturers from the world over made northern Mexico a home away from home decades ago, fundamentally transforming the Mexican economy and creating a mutually beneficial system for the country and company that shows few signs of slowing. China's simply the most recent to recognize the profound appeal. So it's got the geography, it's got the labor, it's got the demand. Seemingly all the pieces are in place for an economic explosion, except for, critically, a plan. President Lopez Obrador and the federal
Meow.
government have been largely absent in the industrial sector. Most of the work to actually attract and incentivize the manufacturing industry has occurred on a state level. States like Nuevo Leon have long focused on developing their manufacturing industries, building industrial parks, offering financial incentives, coordinating with incoming manufacturers, and it's worked. Despite sitting number 7 in terms of population, Nuevo Leon is 3rd on GDP, beaten only by Mexico City and the state that surrounds it. That means the state's per capita GDP is similar to that of Malaysia or Greece, and Nuevo Leon is generally one of the safest Mexican states, on par with many areas in the US. For all these reasons, Monterrey has become the country's 2nd largest center of wealth, after the capital, featuring the tallest skyscraper in Latin America, one of the most modern metro systems in North America, and a dazzling array of upscale hotels and restaurants. Other northern Mexican states have followed suit, working to develop their own US-focused manufacturing industries, but still, inextricably, the country's current leadership fails to grasp the opportunity of the moment. The president has been widely criticized for his lack of focus on the country's industrial sector during what could turn out to be its most pivotal years. In fairness, though, he's been focused on fighting crime. This is justified. The country is experiencing a crippling wave of violence that has pushed its homicide rate up to the 8th highest in the world, but he's still been largely ineffective at blunting it. The US is also worried about crime in Mexico because of its downstream effect. Republicans surveyed ahead of the 2022 US midterms indicated that immigration was their number 2 issue, behind only the economy. American conservatives in particular are worried about the exceptional number of migrants crossing the US-Mexico border through both official and unofficial channels, and a major impetus of this surge is violence. Of course, taking it back one step further, a major impetus of violence is poverty. That's a relationship that academics have established time and time again, and poverty is also a driver of immigration itself. Therefore, you improve the economy, you improve the violence, you reduce the volume of immigrants at the border. Mexican manufacturing is rarely taking the place of American manufacturing these days. Rather, it's taking the place of Chinese manufacturing, so it's trading a distant country with a dubious record respecting human rights and intellectual property for a culturally and politically allied neighbor. This serves the US's global goals, and then on top of that, the economic boon the phenomenon spurs helps solve other American goals. It is, through and through, a virtuous cycle, so the only shame is that Mexican and American federal authorities have yet to fully recognize that. The industry can be a solution to the problems that officials on both sides say they need to focus on first, but unfortunately, there's been a long history on both sides of attacking symptoms rather than actual causes. Mexico is already a powerhouse middle-income industrial economy with incredible geography and an enormous educated labor pool, and it seems like it's finally getting some of the economic expansion it deserves. But this has largely happened in spite of ineffective infrastructure, in spite of crippling violence, in spite of a complacent government, in spite
In a
of
few
so many
hours, the quest will be done.
So a future where Mexican manufacturing grows thanks
as soon
to
as I get that.
something is tantalizing. Just imagine a future where Mexico recognizes potential as strongly as China did 4 decades ago. Some of the most important issues of the moment are also some of the most politicized ones, and media organizations play a part in shaping that reality. Advertising revenue is driven by clicks, clicks are driven by emotion. This video was made possible by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code WENDOVER14 to get 14 free meals plus free shipping. This isn't really the United States. This map, while it may display the technical, internationally recognized borders of the country, just is not fully accurate. It should look more like this. That's because the 89,000 square miles or 230,000 square kilometers now missing from this map are filled by 326 Indian reservations, and the Native American tribes that manage these lands are recognized by the US federal government as sovereigns. That's to say, while these may not be countries, they are, by most measures, independent, sovereign nations. Collectively, reservations account for 2.5% of the US's total landmass, and together would represent the 12th physically largest state, between Michigan and Minnesota. Truly the only commonality between each of the reservations is the system through which they are recognized by the US federal government. They range dramatically in size, system, and function. The smallest, for example, is the Likely Ranchera in Northern California. At just 1.32 acres, it's physically similar in size to many suburban home plots and is used as the cemetery of the Pitt River tribe. There are also plenty of larger reservations without any permanent population. For example, the Ontonagon Indian Reservation in Michigan's Upper Peninsula is mainly used by a branch of the Lake Superior Chippewa tribe as hunting and fishing land, and the small Snoqualmie
Alright, how do I get my mine carts? Talk to Miriam. Miriam. Where's Miriam? Here's Miriam. Hi, Miriam. Are you a dwarf, or did they employ a child to manage these minecarts?
What's the difference?
I have to go unlock all the stations. Okay, so that one's right next to the teleport. So let's go do that one first. Good old Arceus. Thank you, God, for this teleport.
Composed of the tribe's casino. But of course, a majority of reservations are inhabited by anywhere between 1 and 174,000 people. At the upper end of that spectrum, there's the physically largest, most populous, and, by many measures, most politically developed Indian reservation, the Navajo Nation. Centered around northeastern Arizona, but passing into Utah and New Mexico as well, the Navajo Nation is physically larger than 10 US states and has a population greater than that of 18 UN-recognized countries. Now, according to the US, the Navajo Nation is sovereign, but it's certainly not a country. So, what is it? Now, like all Indian reservations, the story of how the Navajo Nation came to be is complex and tragic. Its Diné people have inhabited the Southwest since their migration from Arctic America around the 15th century AD, but the path that directly led to the establishment of the reservation began with the Long Walk. After years of conflict between European Americans and the Diné, the US federal government directed the army to end what was, in their eyes, the Navajo problem. Soldiers descended on Navajo land, destroying much of their civilization, and one by one forced bands of Diné to walk 400 miles or 650 kilometers from their homelands to Fort Sumner in New Mexico, where they were imprisoned on cramped, unproductive land. Hundreds died during the walk, and thousands more while imprisoned. After a few years, though, the government recognized that they had made a mistake. The camp was costly to run due to its low agricultural yields, and they realized the land from which the Diné had come was not what the US would consider useful for its settlers. In exchange for a number of provisions aimed at assimilation, the Navajo and the US signed the Treaty of Bosque Redondo, ending the internment and effectively establishing the Navajo's reservation around their homelands. Still, though, in the decades that followed, the reservation looked little like the nation of today. Change accelerated in 1921, though, when the Aztec Oil Syndicate struck oil 1 mile south of the town of Aztec, New Mexico. This would go on to be developed into the first commercial well in the region,
Guess I gotta
attracting
go all the way
considerable
over there.
attention nationwide. While this first site was outside the reservation, large oil companies soon recognized that there were almost certainly productive sites within Navajo borders. U.S. Secretary of the Interior Albert Bacon Fall, who was quite friendly with the oil and gas industry, and later would become the first presidential cabinet member in history to go to jail after accepting bribes from the industry, recognized that further oil and gas development in the region would require the Navajo system of governance to look a little more like the U.S.'s. At the time, the reservation was administered through a decentralized, somewhat informal, traditional form of governance, which made negotiations with big American companies difficult. Therefore, Fall organized a Navajo Business Council with 3 positions filled by 3 of his appointees, all of whom were Navajo, but also friends of Fall or the industry. However, Bureau of Indian Affairs Commissioner Charles H. Burke recognized that this was far from a democratic process, an unelected council making decisions on behalf of all the Diné people, so he worked to set up an elected tribal council, the new core of the nation's legislative system. Still today, that council serves the same purpose, but its establishment snowballed the Navajo government into something far more formal, sprawling, and Western. The sovereignty of the Navajo Nation is best examined through its capital, Window Rock. Its streets are lined with the offices of all the agencies and organizations running the government functions that the Navajo Nation handles itself. The Division of Public Safety, the Window Rock Police Department, the Office of Community Development, the Navajo Nation Veterans Administration, the Navajo Housing Authority, the Navajo Nation Telecommunications and Utility Agency, the Fish and Wildlife Department, the Heritage and Historic Preservation Office, the Tribal Courts, the Supreme Court, the Office of Vital Records, the Council Chambers, and the Navajo Nation Office of the President and Vice President. Many similarly named structures could also be found in county, state, and national capitals across the US and world, but there are some missing. Also dotting the landscape of Window Rock are features like a branch of the United States Postal Service, an office of the Arizona Motor Vehicle Department, Arizona State Route 264, maintained by the Arizona Department of Transportation, and an airport administered and regulated by the American FAA. Adding to that, one sees many of the chain services and stores of the United States: Aflac, H&R Block, Ace Hardware, Wells Fargo, Chevron, Bank of America, Holiday Inn, McDonald's, and more. However, there is also a small, unique business landscape. There are Navajo Petroleum gas stations, owned by the Navajo Oil and Gas Company of the same name, Basha's Diné Market, which, while owned and operated by the region-wide Basha's brand, is a unique subbrand carrying goods especially in demand by Diné like bluebird flour and mutton, and there's the Navajo Times, which, while originally ran by the government, is now a for-profit, financially independent newspaper. So, the government and economy of the Navajo Nation is an amalgamation of Navajo and American features, so, considering that, can it be considered truly independent? Independence is defined by a lack of dependence, so the answer to that revolves around their relationship with the US. The federal government's official terminology as to what tribal reservations are is, quote, domestic dependent nations. While that term originates from an 1831 Supreme Court case, it's never used elsewhere to define what any other geopolitical entity is, either in the US or internationally, so it's rather ill-defined. Therefore, for all intents and purposes, domestic dependent nation is essentially interchangeable with the term Indian reservation. While what an American state is well understood and defined, what an Indian reservation is defined by a patchwork of decisions, guidelines, legislation, and treaties. For example, the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 made it so that all remaining indigenous people living in the US not already a citizen would be granted such status, meaning, functionally, that all those living on tribal nations are obligated to pay taxes to the US federal government, as the US uniquely taxes on citizenship and not residency. However, when members of tribes live on tribal land, they do not pay taxes to the states that that land is also a part of. Window Rock, for example, is technically part of both Arizona and the Navajo Nation, but its residents only pay taxes to the latter. The tribes themselves, and therefore the reservations, do not pay taxes to either state or federal governments, much like individual American states themselves. Unlike states, however, tribal nations have something similar to a citizenship system. Each tribe has the power to define who can become members and what the process of enrollment looks like. For example, in the case of the Navajo Nation, members need to be at least 1/4 Diné by lineage and not a member of any other tribe. Building on that, private property is essentially non-existent on tribal nations. The land is held in trust by the US federal government and then managed by the tribal governments. Therefore, most residents either live in homes rented out by the Tribal Housing Authority or in mobile homes on public lands. That's because banks won't give loans to build housing within reservations, as the land upon which they be built is publicly owned, so it'd be impossible to repossess the homes if payments fell behind. They will loan for mobile homes since they can be repossessed more easily, but altogether, the policy of public land ownership effectively means tribal nations have immigration control. You can only live in the Navajo Nation, for example, if you qualify for government housing, and you only qualify for government housing if you're either Diné or working in the nation. Adding to this, during the COVID pandemic, the Navajo Nation enacted some of the strictest border restrictions in the United States, essentially prohibiting access to all non-residents except when passing through on state highways, and received no strong legal opposition to such action. So, altogether, the Navajo and other tribal nations have a level of power over who can live and visit their territory that eclipses that of individual US states. However, there are other ways in which these nations parallel states. For example, the US federal government instructs its agencies to treat any interaction with tribal nations as, quote, government to government. Also, like states, tribal nations cannot engage in formal relations with foreign governments, enter into a state of war, or issue currency. All key differentiators between nationhood and countryhood. However, somewhat unlike states, the Navajo Nation has this: a Washington office. This functions somewhat like the offices of different state representatives in DC. However, the Navajo Nation Washington office is closer to an embassy than these, as it exclusively serves to represent the nation through non-voting means to the US government and its agencies. The Navajo Nation wasn't the first to attempt to represent itself in Washington. In 1995, the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma appointed Charles W. Blackwell as the first tribal ambassador to the US. In addition, they opened what they called a Chickasaw Nation Embassy in DC. Now, neither the ambassador nor the embassy had the diplomatic protections of those of foreign nations, so it's unclear how legitimate they were, but there were no challenges to the nation setting up such.
Did I not finish the Queen of Thieves? I'm not. Okay.
A representative system. The Cherokee Nation, also of Oklahoma, is now going a step further, as they believe that they have a legal right to formal representation.
I'm looking for a quest. You look poor. Yeah, I can do the Queen of Thieves. I need a stew. Okay, let's grab a stew.
representation in Washington. An 1835 treaty with the US gave the Cherokee Nation the power. Power to send a non-voting representative to the U.S. Congress, similar to those appointed by the District of Columbia and U.S. territories. Until 2019, the Cherokee never appointed such a representative, but now decided to exercise their rights when they appointed Kimberly Teehee to fill the position. However, as of June 2021, she is yet to be seated by Congress, meaning her power is not yet formalized. While it appears the nation has every legal right to take such action, it's a potentially messy situation.
How's Smellscape?
Somebody told me that I looked poor, so now I'm infiltrating bandits.
Okay.
So, like, kill them dead? Oh. Nope, sounds good to me. I love killing people.
Right, is you a psychopath?
She's done 120 quests. 130 quests, almost 140. You don't do that many quests without becoming a psychopath. Not that I would know, I'm not a psychopath. Look, the gang told me to kill somebody, so, you know. Wait, that option just says murder. The right click option says freaking murder. Alright, well, guess I'm gonna just chuck him in the water. How would you like to kill him, brutally or softly? What do you think, Talon?
Softly.
You realize that you can't really kill someone softly. You brutally murder him instead. Well, alright, well, good you dead. My work here's done. Let me join your gang so I can infiltrate it and probably murder you guys too. I mean, what? I mean, what? I mean, what?
Cherokee tribe already have representation in Congress. While DC and the territories do not receive voting congressional representation, the Cherokee do, as they live in Oklahoma, which, as a state, has voting members in Congress. Having people represented twice in Congress would be unprecedented. It's unclear as of now whether Teehee will be seated, but the reality is that this situation is like many involving tribal powers in the US. They don't know what they can do until they try. In fact, that was exactly what happened in the 1970s when Russell and Helen Bryan of the Chippewa.
Let's talk to the Queen of Thieves. Nice anvil in your hut here.
Is it an anvil in your hut, or are you just happy to see me?
We're here to save Kourend from the corruption that has tainted this kingdom. Yeah, that sounds fine. Now get lost. Okay, you're the boss.
Nation received a property tax bill for around $200 from a county government despite the fact that they were living on tribal lands. Having never received such a bill before, and not believing they were required to pay it, they brought it to a local lawyer who brought their case to the state courts. They lost that case, and they then lost their appeal in the Minnesota Supreme Court, but then they brought it to the United States Supreme Court. Their decision said that not only do states lack the power to tax tribal members on their reservations, but that states don't have the power to regulate any tribal activity on their nations. This was huge, and ideas soon arose as to how to profit from this decision. Quite quickly, small-scale gambling operations sprung up on reservations, and within years, large tribal casinos started opening. Today, these casinos generate tens of billions of dollars in revenue for tribal nations annually.
Kourendin portal paying for itself again. Love this Kourendin portal in my house.
Chippewa Nation, which operates the largest casino in America, just 90 minutes from Dallas. Others, such as the Navajo Nation, are less lucky. Located far from economic opportunity, their unemployment rate is 49%, their average household income is $8,000, their poverty rate is 36%, and 1/3 of their households lack access to running water. Tribal reservations in the U.S. exist in a sort of in-between state. Some sovereign powers are greater than those of states, but they lack the true level of self-determination reserved for countries. However, being in such a lonely club, these reservations don't receive the attention necessary to reform a system that, in many cases, works against them. For example, the system of public ownership of land means that it's essentially impossible for those living on reservations to own their own home. That means they can't build up wealth through home ownership and pass it on to the next generation. Reservations are located in some of the most rural areas of the U.S., in places already experiencing the effects of deep rural-urban economic divide, but being isolated from the system of states and ignored by the federal government due to their political irrelevance, they perpetually fall into the category of not my problem. While there is opportunity in sovereignty, it cannot be realized without trying, and trying new things is effectively impossible for places so deeply entrenched in a cycle of poverty. So, the answer to what the Navajo Nation, or any Native American reservation is that nobody knows. They're what the federal government lets them be, and so far, there hasn't been enough time or money for them to explore their boundaries. So, just over a year ago, I realized something. I had become a takeout and delivery addict. Being a busy person, by the time I got to dinner every day, I was tired and ready to just relax, so I would default to the easiest, most convenient option for food. However, eventually I realized the huge downsides of takeout and delivery. It's incredibly expensive when done regularly, and generally just not very healthy. So I switched to HelloFresh. This is all completely true, and I have hundreds of their recipe cards to prove it, as I've now used them regularly for just over a year. So, a few months ago, I asked them to sponsor the channel, and now they have. Every week, a new HelloFresh box arrives on my doorstep, filled with pre-proportioned ingredients for each meal I picked from the dozens of choices they have each week. For example, this week I made one of my favorites, the firecracker meatballs. Since their meals come with
well, you see, you can engage in some murder.
About 30 minutes to make, you don't have to make long, exhausting trips to grocery
The
stores.
heck, you freaking psychopath.
Also, since you're only getting the amounts you actually need, HelloFresh helps cut down on food waste, and their carbon footprint is about 25% lower than that of store-bought meals. Altogether, HelloFresh just makes my dinner a much more enjoyable experience, so find out why I've been using them for over a year. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code WENDOVER14 to get 14 free meals, plus free shipping.
Hooray! Port Piscarius. 30%. Now I can do the nice favor grind, not the bad ones. Skipping the bad, only the good for me. Then I gotta figure out how to get my Shiazin favor. But it's a little shy.
No. No.
It's a little shy.
Nope.
California is an island. Not literally, of course, but geography and history has subjected the state to the same pressures and influences that make actual islands.
This video is sponsored by 80,000 Hours, the non-profit organization that helps people find rewarding, meaningful careers completely free of charge. But more about that later. I grew up in a car-infested city called London, Ontario, Canada, though I've also lived in some nice places as well. But for most of my life, I lived in Canada or in the United States, and crossing the street was stressful sometimes. I now live in the Netherlands, a country with some of the safest streets in the world for people walking. Crossing the street here is not stressful at all. I'm still amazed when I go back to visit family in Canada how unnecessarily difficult and dangerous it is to cross the street. It really shouldn't be, but it is, and most of that comes down to the way we design our streets. To understand why it's safer and easier to cross the street in the Netherlands, it's useful to look at the alternatives first. This crossing probably looks pretty normal to anybody from the US or Canada, so let me explain some of the problems here. First, North American intersections are pretty stupid. I mean, simple. All traffic gets a green light in one direction, then the light turns red, and all traffic gets a green light in the other direction. Sometimes there are some slight quirks like dedicated left turn arrows, but for the most part, this behavior describes the vast majority of intersections in the US and Canada. Traffic lights are designed and timed primarily for cars. The goal here is to keep motor vehicle traffic flowing as quickly as possible. There are often loops in the ground to detect cars, but there's no detection of people walking, and it's usually required to press a beg button, like this one, to cross the street. And depending how that signal is programmed, it may be required to press the beg button within a certain time window, or it won't work. For instance, from one of my early videos about traffic lights, this man pushed the button too late, so the signal changed to green without changing the walk indicator, meaning that these people need to cross illegally and scurry across the intersection like animals. Here, I press the button, and the light goes red for cars, but I'm still not allowed to go. In this case, there's a green left turn arrow or advanced green, which allows the left turn lane to clear, so I still need to wait. Before I start walking through, I have to look left because drivers are allowed to make right turns on red lights. This is very dangerous to people walking, as it's very, very common for drivers not to stop when turning right on red, and their attention is almost exclusively on the flow of traffic coming from the left, which makes it harder to spot people crossing the street. One American study found a 69% increase in cars crashing into people walking when right turn on red was permitted. Right turns on red lights should never be permitted because it's dangerous and there are much better ways of speeding up car traffic, but it's still the norm almost everywhere in the US and Canada, with very few exceptions. Anyway, back to crossing the street. The crossing length is quite long because of the multiple wide traffic lanes. As I get past the middle of the intersection, I need to watch out for cars turning left or right through the crossing. And finally, I get to the other side. At a typical intersection in the US or Canada, the walk signal and the green light trigger at the same time. This means that anybody walking needs to watch out for cars turning right. In this case, all of the drivers decide to go first, even though they should have yielded to the person walking. The solution to this is what's called a leading pedestrian indicator, which triggers the walk signal before the green light, allowing pedestrians to get a head start. These are quite common in the Netherlands, but they're starting to be implemented in some cities in North America as well. However, this is much less effective when right turn on red is allowed because drivers can still turn right anyway. And of course, you need to check for any drivers running a red light before crossing too, something particularly common in downtown Toronto. A typical American walk signal will come on for only a few seconds, then turn to a flashing hand with a countdown timer, showing how much time is left to cross the street. It's illegal to begin crossing if the countdown timer has started, and cities like Toronto are starting to enforce this rule at some intersections in order to speed up car traffic. This means that if you're not waiting at the intersection at just the right time to cross, you missed your chance and have to wait another light cycle. Crossing distances can be very, very long in North America as well, meaning that there's a very long time that a person walking is vulnerable in the intersection. This is particularly bad in many parts of the American South, like here in Las Vegas, because these places are designed almost exclusively to move as many cars as possible, not for the benefit of people outside of cars. Las Vegas is a horrible place to walk, but lots of people need to do it, and these people are left dealing with whatever scraps are left over after traffic engineers are done designing exclusively for cars. And even at traffic signals, there are times when pedestrian crossings aren't allowed in order to speed up car traffic. It's very telling that North American cities will spend millions of dollars on projects designed to speed up a driver's commute by a few minutes, but routinely make road changes that add to the time it takes to walk somewhere. This is also why you'll see another common problem crossing the street in the US and Canada. There are often very long distances between crossings because too many stoplights will slow down car traffic. For example, how are you supposed to get to this bus stop? And when you do get off a bus in many suburban places in America, it's a long walk to the nearest intersection. And finally, there are slip lanes like this one that allow drivers to turn right without a signal and without slowing down. These are extremely dangerous for people outside of cars and should never be used where people are expected to cross. They really highlight that North American traffic engineers value the convenience of the people who drive more than the lives of the people who walk. In a few cities, these are being removed to increase safety. There used to be one here on this corner, but it was filled in with a small stormwater management garden a few years ago. Now drivers need to make a much slower and safer sharp turn here. So with all that in mind, what is it like to cross the street in the Netherlands? This is de Bouwstraat, which is one of the busier roads for car traffic in Amsterdam. In the 1960s, this intersection was a lot less friendly for people outside of cars, but thankfully the city has done a lot of work to repair it. What's really crazy to me though is that this road in Amsterdam is actually a little bit wider, sidewalk to sidewalk, than this road in Las Vegas. You can always determine the priorities of traffic engineers by the way they use the space available. But despite being very wide, this road is still very easy to cross. Look what happens when the walk signal turns on. People walking get a walk signal immediately and can cross to this area in the middle called a refuge island, even though cars are still able to drive in the lane that is farther away. This is the genius of Dutch traffic lights. Every direction is completely independent, so the behavior can change depending on what traffic is detected, making the system work better for everyone. I made an earlier video about how this works better for drivers, but it obviously works better for people walking too. With an intersection like this, you get to start crossing earlier, so there's less waiting at traffic lights. But it's safer too, because you only have to look in one direction at a time as you're crossing, and you're safe from traffic while on the refuge island. The island also forces drivers to take a wider turn, which means they approach the crossing perpendicularly and are more likely to see anyone who is crossing the street. Look what happens when I cross this time. I'm able to walk across as usual, but as I get to the other side, the traffic control system detects that there's no other vehicle traffic coming in the next lane, so the walk signal turns green for the first half of the crossing. By the time I make it across this part of the street, the car traffic is cleared in the next lane, and I'm able to keep crossing. All this happened while the signal was still green in the perpendicular direction. This is the benefit of smart traffic lights and allowing people to cross the street halfway. Interestingly, many walk safety advocates have argued against having these two-phase crossings because North American traffic engineers tend to program the signals so that people walking need to cross in two phases, making it take even longer to cross the street. The channel Ontario Traffic Man has a great video about this. It's definitely worth watching. I'd like to quickly mention the pedestrian scramble, where all walk indicators turn on at the same time so that people can cross in any direction they want, like at the famous Shibuya crossing in Japan. Or this example on Oxford Street in London. There are a couple of these in Toronto too, which is nice to see. Apparently there are 2 of these in the Netherlands, though I've never been to them. But personally, I believe that if you have enough people walking to justify a scramble intersection, then that place should probably be pedestrianized. And what about beg buttons? Well, we have them here too, though they're usually only to turn on the audio signal for people with limited vision. But one big difference here is that they can be pressed at any time. Watch how the light immediately turns green for these people when they press the button. And at some intersections, there are radar detectors, which can automatically detect people approaching the crossing. These radar sensors are also sometimes used to detect if someone is taking a long time to cross the street and will keep the walk signal on longer, or turn it off if no one else is crossing. Lane widths are much narrower in the Netherlands than in the US or Canada, so the crossing distance is shorter even if there are the same number of lanes. For roads within cities, the Netherlands has the narrowest lanes in the world, some as narrow as 2.7 meters. While city roads and stroads in
Why
North
must you
America
choose that
are
shoulder,
anywhere
Cat?
from 3.3 to 3.6.
It's like you're going for the microphone.
That's wider than
Cat
highway
wants to
lanes
say
here
something.
in the Netherlands, which is part of what makes
Cat, don't
American
say the
streets
gamer
so
word.
dangerous.
I'm streaming.
They're designed like highways. Some cities in North America
Meow.
purposely narrow their
Cat,
streets,
how could you
especially
say that?
crossings, which really should be done more often. Here's another small detail that makes a big difference. Here in the Netherlands, the traffic light for cars is on the near side of the intersection. This means that in order to see the traffic light, a driver needs to stop before the zebra crossing. But in North America, the traffic light is on the far side of the intersection, and this makes a huge difference. Because it means that a driver can drive into the zebra crossing and still see the traffic light on the other side, which results in this very common situation of a driver blocking the zebra crossing. Now, what about minor junctions, those that don't have a traffic signal? Here is a typical minor junction, like you'll find all over Canada and the US, and there will almost always be a stop sign. I made another video about the problems with stop signs, so I won't cover that here. I'm just glad I live in a country that doesn't use stop signs unless absolutely necessary. Anyway, as you approach a junction like this, the sidewalk ends, then you need to step down to the level of the road to cross the street, and then go back up to the sidewalk on the other side. It is very clear that you are crossing a space meant for cars, and this design really reinforces the idea that it's the responsibility of the person walking to be careful when crossing the street. And since you need to go down to the level of the road in order to cross, there need to be ramps for people in wheelchairs. And these ramps can get clogged with water and debris. Drivers are supposed to come to a complete stop at this white line before the crossing, but very few people actually do this. In particular, drivers turning right often turn without stopping at all while only looking left or avoiding traffic.
I can.
This is
Cat.
clearly a car-first approach,
Stop that.
designed to allow drivers to turn as quickly as possible rather than for the safety of people walking. Now look at how this kind of minor junction is designed in the Netherlands with a continuous sidewalk. In this design, the sidewalk continues through the intersection without dropping down, making it very clear that this is a space for people walking. Drivers have to go up a ramp to get to the junction, and this means that a car is guaranteed to slow down before the crossing because physics works better than science. Streets in older neighborhoods that haven't been updated yet still have the old design that looks a lot like North America. But continuous sidewalks are now proven to be safer, so this has become the new standard across the country. And they're being built in many other cities in Europe as well. I have a full video about continuous sidewalks if you'd like to learn more about them. But since making that video, I've heard from so many people with physical disabilities who tell me how much they prefer this kind of crossing. People who are blind or partially sighted find it much easier to cross as there are no tripping hazards. And people in wheelchairs are very happy not to have to go down and up ramps to get across the street. These really are a vastly superior design and should be implemented everywhere. Ironically, North America does have this kind of design along almost any stroke with a sidewalk, but only at the entrances to businesses. but this implementation is much worse. The ramp is very gradual and cuts into the sidewalk space, making it much easier for drivers to drive quickly over it. As usual, North American traffic engineers prioritize driver speed and convenience over the safety of people walking. At small four-way intersections, the entire area is raised up to sidewalk level. This makes it much more convenient for people walking, but it also acts like a big speed bump, making it difficult for drivers to go too quickly through the intersection. And there are roundabouts. The remarkable design of a Dutch roundabout deserves its own video someday, but what's important is that it's designed to make people walking or cycling much more visible to drivers. Of course, if you find yourself wanting to cross the street in the Netherlands, there's another option. You can just cross the street wherever you want to, which is not an option in most of the US because of decades of automobile industry propaganda. This is a famous video of Market Street in San Francisco, taken from the front of a trolley in 1906. You can see that automobiles were already a common sight, but there was also a lot of public transit, people walking, and some people on bicycles too. This looks chaotic, but at slow speeds, mixed traffic generally works pretty well. Unfortunately, cars became heavier and a lot faster. For example, the Ford Model T, released in 1908, had a top speed of over 70 kilometers per hour. By the 1920s, the general public hated cars and wanted to have speed governors installed on them for use within cities. Cities also introduced high fines and penalties for dangerous driving. And when all this blowback resulted in a drop in car sales of 12% in 1924, the automobile industry started to get worried. So they invented a new term, jaywalking, literally shaming people for crossing the street anywhere except at designated crossings. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of jaywalking. You can read the links in the description if you want, but what's important here is that the automobile industry flipped the conversation. Instead of drivers being held accountable for killing people, the burden of responsibility was now on the person crossing the street, even though it was the drivers who were making the streets dangerous in the first place. To be clear, jaywalking is not and was never about safety. Safety could have been achieved with speed governors. It was always about getting people out of the way of cars so that those cars could drive faster. And this was a major change in the way Americans approach road fatalities and crossing the street in general that persists even today. Here's what Market Street in San Francisco looked like in the 1960s, with people confined to cross only at designated areas. This is a major difference in a fairly short period of time. Incidentally, in 2020, San Francisco banned all private vehicles from Market Street to make it more efficient for people traveling by public transit and bicycle. Unfortunately, people aren't allowed to cross the street wherever they want yet, so there's still some work to be done to repair it. Jaywalking is a very American concept. Outside of the United States, there aren't a lot of places that make it illegal to cross mid-block, and there are even fewer places where these laws are actually enforced. For example, in Ontario, Canada, there is no law at all against crossing the street mid-block. So what I'm doing right here in Toronto is
We're gonna finish Piscarillius tonight. I didn't realize it would be this fast for collecting worms in a bucket.
For crossing the street like this on multiple occasions. Here in the Netherlands, there used to be a law that stated that you couldn't cross the street within 30 meters of a zebra crossing, but that law was repealed in 1995. Now the Dutch can cross wherever they damn well please because, unlike America, this is the land of freedom. What most people don't know is that it hasn't always been this way in the Netherlands. If you had done this comparison in the 1960s or 1970s, there wouldn't have been much difference between Dutch and American cities. Most of these changes only happened since the 1990s when the Dutch developed what they call sustainable traffic safety, a system that focuses on making the streets fundamentally safer by fixing the infrastructure itself, rather than the lazy approach of education campaigns, pedestrian victim blaming, or asking drivers really nicely if they could please maybe consider not driving so dangerously. This difference becomes very clear when you look at the approach to infrastructure. Here in the Netherlands, the emphasis is on using infrastructure to appropriately slow cars, so that it is very difficult for drivers to drive quickly through crossings. Whereas in the US and Canada, there's this outdated belief that crashes between cars and people are due to the people not being visible enough. There's almost no acknowledgement that driver attention and driver speed are the major contributing factors to serious crashes, because the overwhelming design goal for North American streets is to keep cars moving as quickly as possible. Zebra crossings in North America are really, really dangerous because you usually have to cross multiple lanes of high-speed traffic and hope that every driver stops.
Jesus.
But since no traffic engineer is willing to slow down the cars, the design stays the same, and the focus is only on making people walking more visible. So we get designs like this. These are technically called head crossovers, but almost everyone in Canada will call this a crosswalk. You'll find them between signalized intersections, though usually only in urban areas. When you want to cross the street, you press this button, and it makes these yellow lights flash. Then drivers are supposed to yield to pedestrians. These are an improvement to regular zebra crossings, but there are still several issues. For example, drivers don't have to stop when the lights are on, they just need to yield. So there are many times that a driver doesn't notice or doesn't care that a person is crossing. And since crosswalks often span multiple lanes, you need to ensure that both drivers notice that you're crossing and that both drivers stop. And there's no difference in road design, which means that a driver who isn't paying attention will just drive right through. And of course, they're still built on the myth that the reason people get hit by cars is because they're not visible enough. I was hit by a car at this crosswalk by a distracted driver back in 2014. Thankfully, I escaped with minor injuries, but only because his windows were open and he could hear me scream at him to stop. The Netherlands also has mid-block zebra crossings as well, but they're designed to be much safer. In most cases, these will have some kind of speed hump or raised crossing that forces a driver to pay attention. And there will almost always be only one lane for car traffic in each direction at a crossing. In this example, the street narrows physically, these lines make the street look more narrow visually, and finally, the crossing itself is raised up like a speed bump.
Explain to me, Cat.
This allows people to cross the street without any drop down to road level and with multiple refuge islands in between. In North America, this would all be one unprotected zebra crossing spanning multiple lanes of car traffic. On roads with higher vehicle speeds, there is a speed bump before the crossing so that drivers must slow down before reaching the crossing. All of these things make crossings like this much safer because, again, physics works better than science. And flashing lights, too. In the US, they have something even more insane and over-engineered. The hawk signal. These monstrosities typically cost over $100,000 and have this bizarre configuration of lights. Now, logically, it would make more sense to just install a regular traffic light, but since this is America, the hawk crossing is designed to allow a person to cross the street while inconveniencing drivers as little as possible. When you press the button at a hawk crossing, you have to wait. The lights will flash in this pattern, and once the walk signal comes on, you can start crossing the street. The lights will flash red after a few seconds, and drivers are now allowed to start driving if their lane is clear. Of course, a hawk crossing still depends on what American traffic engineers call driver compliance, which is normally good, but one Delaware study found that at some hawk crossings, more than 41% of motorists were observed disregarding the red signal. And since hawk signals are almost always used over multi-lane stroads with no refuge island, you need to make sure that there's, quote, driver compliance for every single one of those 4 to 6 lanes of traffic you're crossing. In the end, all of this over-engineered nonsense is here because American traffic engineers can't do what has been proven over and over again to actually improve safety for people walking: slowing the cars. It's at this point that some Americans will flippantly say that what we really need is pedestrian bridges. That way, people walk
Pisclarius
without
Favour
at all.
done.
But this solution is almost always proposed by the people who drive, not the people who walk. These crossings are miserable. And they make
Just
what
need
should be
Shay is
shorter
in favor now. Shay is Shazian? Shazian? Shazian favor.
Schmazian.
Schmagigian.
Schmarmageddon.
Shmibbity dibbity. I need to do some bursting for Shazen.
So I started bursting.
Killing some lizard folk. But I guess that'll be it for tonight. I think I'll do other quests next. Got some quest queued up. My Arm's Big Adventure. Dream Mentor. I think I could do Beneath Cursed Sands if I really put my mind to it. And maybe could do Sins of the Father. That one's a little trickier. But Beneath Cursed Sands is probably not too bad. Gotta do all these combat thingies. Well, that's the new quest. It's in the list now. What do I need for King's Ransom? 65 defense. What is my defense at? 64 and a half. Okay, well that one's soon. Soon. Tale of Two Cats I can do. I think that one's not bad. Kingdom Divided is what I need all this favor for. Yeah, we're making some progress. Cool. Alright, bye.